Hmm. Okay, Boker Tov, Shavua Tov, and welcome to our weekly Parsha class. Parsha of Beshalach. When Michael and Lance and Diane, Dina, Lynn, Tom, Dylan, Sora, and all the millions of people who are watching us on the worldwide web. This week, Parsha of Beshalach. Beautiful, beautiful Parsha. So much to discuss. Um, the splitting of the sea is a big theme in this week's parsha. We're talking about when the Jewish people leave Egypt. Last week already, we experienced the exodus of Egypt, and now the Jewish people, after just a week of traveling, they meet the Yam Suf, and they are stuck between a rock and a hard place. Right? Literally, they have. At one point, actually, it says that they actually went between these two big rocks because after leaving Egypt, Hashem wanted to, Pharaoh was monitoring the situation. Like, where are they? How far did they go? And he notices that they went, and then they started coming back. It seemed like they were lost. They ended up between these two large stones, large rocks, and then they also end up in front of one of the deities, one of like the idols of Egypt. And Pharaoh's like, oh, they must be totally lost. They don't know what's going on with them in the desert. But eventually, Pharaoh gathered his men, his army, and he started chasing them. He regrets leaving them out of Egypt. And the Jewish people are standing in front of the water, the Yam Suf. The Egyptians are behind them. Now, what happened? Where did they go? You seem like they're stuck, right? So we have the story of obviously we know that what happened. Um, we have the splitting of the sea. The Jewish people are able to miraculously pass through the water, dry land, and we know that that experience was a very important experience. It wasn't just a manner of survival. We had to save the Jewish people, so we split the sea. I think we spoke about this last year. That the idea was much more profound than that. It was really a completion of the exodus of Egypt on a physical level and on a spiritual level as well. So we have the splitting of the sea. Another very important theme in this week's parsha is the story of the manna that fell from heaven for 40 years that the Jewish people were in the desert. They had bread, they had food coming from heaven. There was this miraculous bread, a food that they did not have to toil for, they didn't have to work hard for, they didn't have to go to work, they didn't have to work the ground, farm the land. It was just given to them like on the silver spoon. Literally, they would just wake up in the morning, open the door, and they had food. And it was the most scrumptious food. It was the tastiest food. It was the best food. It was miraculous food. It says that they were consume the food and did not have any waste. They didn't have to use the bathroom. There was no there was nothing in it that wasn't able to be digested properly in the body. It was very refined and miraculous food that lasted for so many years, for 40 years, all the time that the Jewish people were in the desert. So then there are some other themes in this week's parsha as well. Towards the end of the parsha, we have the incident of Amalek, the first war that was waged against the Jewish people, and the Jewish people miraculously won the war. But just the fact that someone was willing to fight the Jewish people, right? The Jewish people just left Egypt. Something that was mind-boggling. No one ever imagined that there would be millions of people, a nation of Jewish people, to leave Egypt. That Pharaoh would actually open his doors. And they heard about the miracles. They heard about the miracles of the plagues. They heard about the miracles of the splitting of the sea. And they understood that the God of the Jews is someone you don't want to mess with. And then that for Amalek, who was actually a cousin, right? We know Amalek was the grandson of Esau, so he was a cousin, and he's or his descendants. They come and they start fighting the Jewish people. It really shook waves around the world that someone is willing to fight the Jewish people. Well, because of that, till today, the Torah tells us there's a commandment to remember Amalek and to wipe them out. Wipe them out. Just it's the idea of Amalek, even though we don't have actually descendants of Amalek today, because over the years, they were lost. There's no like actual nation or people today that we could say this is an actual biological descendant of Amalek, but the concept of Amalek, the concept of being cold, being cynical, and threatening something that's so dear to everyone, something holy, something godly, that idea has to be wiped out. By the way, now that in Hague, where they have this international court, joke, if I can tell you to say that. But this whole thing that's going on, one of the things that South Africa is saying is that there was some mention by some of the Israelis. They mentioned this verse that we have to wipe out Amalek in reference to Hamas and Gaza. So like they were using that as, oh, this must be a genocide or whatever it is, ridiculous thing they were saying. But there was a reference to this week's Parsha, the idea of wiping out nation of Amalek, which today is seen as more of the concept, the idea of Amalek, which is the idea of being cold and apathetic. That is something we have to destroy. Okay, well, I want to go back to the beginning of the Parsha. The beginning of the Parsha, we talk about when the Jewish people are stuck, but the Egyptians are behind them. The water's in front of them. We know at that point there's already the clouds of glory that were surrounding the Jewish people, which is, by the way, one of the reasons why we sit in a sukkah during the holiday of Sukkot, because to remember the clouds of glory that surrounded us from all four sides. And this wasn't just a cloud that it was cool to be in a cloud, but it actually was protecting us. When the Egyptians were close enough, they reached close enough to the Jewish people that they're able to shoot at them. They were shooting their arrows, their bows and arrows that they were shooting against the Jewish people, but it was actually the cloud was being used as a shield, where the arrows wouldn't actually go through the cloud, but the cloud would actually take them in and then turn them around and spit them out back at the Egyptians. So it wasn't like imminent, that they were being shot at, but they felt what's going to be, right? Where are we going? What's the plan? And they all turned to Moses. They said, Moses, what's going on over here? And as the Jewish people have a history, obviously some of them were complaining. Moses, surprised, right? Moses, what's going on over here? Why did you take us out of Egypt? You took us out of Egypt, so we should die over here in the desert. Is that why you took us out? Well, so much better over there. Anyway, there's various approaches of what they said, but here's the answer. I want to read the answer inside, because the answer brings up an interesting topic in Jewish law, which is perhaps not spoken about much, but the interesting idea of our relationship with Egypt. Our relationship with Egypt, I don't mean on the political sense, but as Jewish people in Jewish law, about traveling to Egypt. Have any of you been to Egypt? Yeah. People travel there, tour the Jewish communities in Egypt. And we'll see what the Torah says about living in Egypt or visiting Egypt. So I think it's an interesting idea and a powerful overall life lesson that we could take from this. So let's read this inside. We are going to be on page we'll start from verse 11. So we'll be page 426, 427, chapter 14, verse 11. We'll read a few verses inside. In the English one, on page 427. This is when the Jewish people open their mouths and they speak to Moshe. They say, "Vayoimru el Moshe." They said to Moshe, "Hamibli ein kvarim b'Mitzrayim lekachtonu lamos b'midbar." Is it because there aren't enough graves in Egypt? Have you taken us to die here in the desert? What is this that you have done to us? To take us out of Egypt. I mean, you can just imagine what's going through Moshe's mind. Hello, you don't remember what happened in Egypt? Suddenly you're complaining. Well, you don't think God could take care of this? He was able to bring all the 10 plagues. That he was able to do it. Now you can't figure out how to get out of this. Okay, but they're complaining. They said to Moshe, aren't these the words that we spoke to you in Mitzrayim? We said, Chadal mimenu v'navnu es Mitzrayim. Leave us alone and we will serve the Egyptians. it is better for us to serve the Egyptians than to die in the Midbar. The truth is, this is not necessarily where all of the Jewish people had this approach. I think most people probably did not have this approach. However, there's a reference to when Moshe, I think this is a reference to when Moshe is when he killed one of the Egyptians that was hitting the Israelite, and the next day he saw two of them fighting. It might be in that incident that they mentioned something like that. But either way, this was their complaint. So what's Moshe's response? Verse 13. Moshe spoke to the nation. Al Tiro, and he said, don't be afraid. Hisyatsu, stand firm. Uru'u, and you will see, as Yeshua's Hashem, God's salvation. Asher yasa lochem hayoyim, which he will do for you today. Ki, because Asher re'isa bes Mitzrayim hayoyim, as you have seen Egypt with the Egyptians today, lo yisifu liroy sam oid ad elam, you will never see them again. Hashem yilachim lachem, God will fight for you. But atem tacharishu, you'll be silent. God is fighting on your behalf. All you have to do is just wait and watch. You don't have to do anything. Don't worry. God is protecting you. You see the Egyptians today. You'll never see them again. Don't worry. It's in good hands. We're taking care of you. You can just sit and relax. Almost reminds me of that of the analogy or the story of the little infant, the little baby, who has been traveling with his mother across the country. Oh, not the country, across what's the word? When you go around the world. They went on around the world trip, many different flights. They went on the plane, they went off the plane, they went on the plane, they went off the plane, and here and there. They traveled around the world. They went for 6 months. And after that, they asked the mother, how was your trip? Oh, it was beautiful. It was very tiring. I went on this flight, then they got off the flight, they went to the hotel, then they went to here, and they went to the touring, and they went back on the plane, another flight. So much traveling, They asked the little baby, the ill infant, how was your trip? He said, I didn't go anywhere. I was in my mother's arms the whole time. But if you think about it, it's a powerful idea, right? The idea that the baby knows I'm in my mother's arms. Wherever I feel safe. I'm not only feel safe, I'm not even tired because I'm not doing anything. I'm just being carried from place to place. I'm not exerting any effort. My mother is taking care of me. And that's what Hashem tells the Jewish people. Hashem yilachim lachem. God will fight for you. Atem tacharishon. You can sit and be silent. Don't worry about it. You're in your mother's arms. You have the clouds of glory. God is holding you. You don't have to worry. He's doing all the hard work. He's doing all the everything. You just sit and relax. God is protecting. And then he says, God says to Moshe, why are you crying to me? Why are you praying? Don't waste time. Speak to the Jewish people. Let them travel. Let them go. Wait, there's water in front of them. Don't worry about the water. You just travel. Don't worry about everything else. And you pick up your stick, hit the water, and it's going to split. The Jewish people, they hear the instructions. Go. Go. What do you mean? There's water. Go. They know what to do. So we're told, the Gemara, the Talmud tells us that there was one Jew. His name was Nachshon, the son of Aminadab. Nachshon. He hears the instructions. Go. He goes. With his water. He goes. And it didn't split initially. He's walking in. Everyone's watching. Everyone's watching. What's going to be? Look at this Meshuggah. Look at this guy. He's just going. He's going into the water because God said you should go. And he's walking and he's walking and he's walking and his water's getting deeper and deeper and deeper until it was up to his nostrils. What's going to be? This guy's going to drown. And then once it reached that point, the water split. The idea was that someone had to trust and demonstrate this trust. God says to go, doesn't make any sense. I see the water, you got to go anyway. This is obviously a very powerful lesson as well in our life, where sometimes we know what we have to do the right thing, but how can I do it? There's so many challenges, so many obstacles in the way. The obstacles are only a test. You got to go. God says, I'll take care of the rest. You do your part, I do my part, and it's a good partnership. So that was the story of the splitting of the sea. But I want to go back to this one verse about mentioning Egypt, because it's an interesting language over here. Moshe says that you see the Egyptians today. You're not going to see them again forever. So what does this mean? You're not going to see them again forever. And Rashi explains that that you see the Egyptians, that's only today. Today you see the Egyptians, but tomorrow you're not going to see the Egyptians. So seemingly, what it means is they're going to be destroyed. The Egyptian army are going to be destroyed in the water. So don't worry about it. Today you see them, tomorrow they're not going to be here. However, the Midrash, I think it's a Mechilta, name of one of the Midrash, and Nachmanides, one of the commentaries, elaborates on this as well. He says that actually the Torah over here is giving us a mitzvah, a negative mitzvah, meaning a prohibition. And the Torah over here is telling us that it is forbidden to go back and see Egypt. You are not allowed to return to Egypt. You should not, you're not allowed to. It's a commandment, it's a directive. Not only you will not see them again because they'll be destroyed, but you are not allowed to see them again forever. That's what the Mechilta said. And the truth is, we also have an interesting reference to this later, where where the Torah talks about the laws of a Jewish king. And one of the things is that a king is not allowed to have many horses, too many horses. Because the Torah says, but if he has too many horses, he may return to Egypt. So we see this concept that we're not, once we left Egypt, it is actually prohibited to return to Egypt. You're planning your Egyptian trip. Oh, it's a good thing you didn't plan your trip yet. But the truth is, it's not so simple, because we have to understand what exactly does this mean. Because we know that there were many Jewish communities in Egypt up until recent time, maybe even today. I don't know, but there's synagogues there. The great Maimonides lived in Egypt for most of his life, or a large chunk of his life, maybe 20, 30 years at least. He was the king. He was the king's private physician. There were others, great sages, religious Jews who lived in Egypt. There were many communities in Egypt, even though they say that the communities in Egypt never really lasted long. There was always something that went wrong with the communities in Egypt throughout history. But there were many Jews. In fact, the Talmud tells us that actually that the first synagogue, meaning a synagogue outside of the temple, outside of the Beis HaMikdash, because generally we understand that the synagogues really, the phenomenon of a synagogue really started after the destruction of the Second Temple, where we don't have a temple in Jerusalem. So every community built like their own little temple. Obviously, it's not Beis HaMikdash, but a place of prayer, a place of community, a place where people get together. That phenomenon really began after the destruction of the temple. However, the Talmud mentioned that in Alexandria, in Egypt, this is already during the temple times, they already built a actually magnificent temple. The Talmud says so much so that if whoever hasn't seen that temple hasn't seen a beautiful structure. It was that beautiful, that magnificent. It was beautiful, big. They had a few 100,000 members. At least they said there were a few 100,000 Jews living in Alexandria at the time. So there's a very large Jewish community over there in Egypt. It didn't last long. It was destroyed when the Second Temple was destroyed. But the point is that throughout, definitely since the Jewish people left Egypt, there were people who lived in Egypt. So we have to understand exactly what does this mean that we're not supposed to return to Egypt. So there are different, there are various explanations to this idea. Some have a very more like a technical halachic explanation to this idea why people have returned to Egypt over the years. Some say it's the prohibition is not necessarily a prohibition of just living there or visiting there, but it's really about settling there like full time. If someone says, I'm going to settle in Egypt and retire in Egypt, that may be problematic. But if someone says, I'm going to go there because I have a business opportunity or I want to visit or I want to live there for a number of years, maybe perhaps for that it would be allowed. Um, and some people give a kind of similar, like more like technical answer that the prohibition is only for something very specific. But the concept is interesting because what's the reason? What's wrong with going back to Egypt? I mean, we've been to many throughout our history, the Jewish people history. There have been many places where we've been persecuted, and people go back, right? In fact, after the expulsion from Spain, 1492, there was actually this movement where people were saying maybe we should make an official ban, like a halachic ban, like the rabbi should come up and say it's forbidden for Jews to ever return to Spain. And in fact, trying to remember who it was, one of the Sephardic rabbis in Israel was once going to visit Spain, and he had a whole question, should I go back to Spain? Because in our family we had this thing, we shouldn't go back to Spain. But then he kind of proved that it wasn't a real ban. And no one actually ever, there was like this rumor that there was a ban, but they never really made a ban not to go back to Spain. Similarly, um, in Germany, right after the Holocaust, there was some who were saying we should make a new thing that Jews don't go to Germany. We don't go back to Germany. Never, but that never happened. Right? Jews do go back. But in fact, today there's thriving Jewish communities in Germany. I've been to Germany a number of years ago. It was probably about 15, 16, 17 years ago. I don't remember when it was. I spent a few weeks in northern Germany. I haven't been to the big communities where they have I've been to many Jews living in Germany. They're very successful. There's big synagogues. And the truth is, they're very well. The locals, the government. We know today. Well, just now what's happening. Germany is probably almost probably the best ally in the world, perhaps in Europe for sure. They're standing strong and supporting Israel like no other country. I mean, that's actually amazing to see so much support, almost like above and beyond what you would expect from another country to stand up to support Israel. Now with Hague, they said that they'll support Israel and whatever. Just it's so many different ways. Who would ever think that Germany would be the one to be the greatest ally um, of Israel? The point is that we did not make this ban, right? But in Egypt, the one place that the Torah itself puts like this ban says, "Do not return to Egypt." Is it because of the Egyptians? Is it because of the culture that Egypt had at the time, which is something that very foreign to our culture and the culture of serving one God? Perhaps today we don't have that culture. Today is a very different culture. It's just a regular, typical Islamic state, whatever. And I'm sure there are many good people in Egypt. But what's this idea not to go back to Egypt? It's a great question. Is Chabad in Egypt? So today, my understanding is I've never been to Egypt. My understanding is that there isn't really a local Jewish community anymore in Egypt. There was, by the way, like just whatever the last, I don't know, maybe 30, 40, 50, I'm not sure when it went, but definitely, um, no, but I think it's longer than that. I mean, it's really since I think Israel, since 1948, I think that's when it was so unsafe and dangerous for the Jewish people there. So they all basically immigrated to Israel. But there are many Sephardic Jews who are Egyptian. Yeah, my grandmother, she lived in Egypt. Those I'm not sure what the numbers are, but there were Jewish community. They were all like Sephardic, Middle Eastern Jews that lived in Egypt. Absolutely, there are many Jews. So I think today, my understanding is, uh, I don't know if there's like no like zero Jews who live there. Maybe there are a handful. I don't know. I didn't look it up, but there's definitely my understanding of that there isn't a community. There is actually a synagogue in Egypt till today. It's not functioning, but there's a structure, and I think it's called Maimonides Synagogue. I don't know if there's literally like the synagogue that Maimonides created, or maybe because it's just because Maimonides was such an important figure, so they named the synagogue after him. I'm not sure what the history is. Again, I didn't look it up before to see what the history is, but I do know like literally like maybe like a year ago or 2 years ago, the Egyptian government restored or renovated and restored the synagogue. They did not invite any of the Jewish people or delegation or Israel, anything like your embassy or not like so. It's just like the Egyptian government felt it was important to renovate it, but they did not want to connect for some reason with the Jewish community. So I don't know exactly. I mean, I think there's an Israeli embassy in Egypt. I think there's right where we have good ties with Egypt. So I don't know. I'm not speaking from any knowledge of what's going on in Egypt, but I don't think there's a full-time Chabad. There were times, in Chabad, we have this cycle. We study a lot of Maimonides, books, and every day we study some Maimonides. So when we made a conclusion of the entire book, for a few years, a delegation of Chabad from Israel will travel south to Egypt to have a little bit of a celebration of studying Maimonides, in Egypt. But I don't think that happens now. I think that happened a few times over, but it's not a regular thing. Maimonides himself actually died in Egypt, but he was buried in northern Israel in Tiberias and Tiberia. Either way, so here's the idea that I think we could also take to heart a lesson from this idea of not returning to Egypt, and that is we have a certain relationship, not just with ourselves, with our family, but also with the space that we are in, the place. The Talmud says something very interesting. It says 40 days before a child is born, there's a heavenly voice that comes out that says, this person, the son of these parents, or the daughter of these parents, will marry that person. Which means our shidduch, it's already preordained. God already decided who's going to marry. The voice also announces this home, this house is going to belong to this person. So you think, oh, I got a great deal. I found a house, perfect. Preordained. God already decided this house is going to belong to this person. And for how long? For this many years. We think, oh, that I may be here permanently. Then God says, you know what, you're going to have this house only for 10 years, for 20 years. But it's already preordained. All preordained. The third thing that this voice announces, this field will belong to this person. So you have a house, you have field, and you have marriage, family. So in other words, you can break it down to family, business, because the field basically meant business, right? And home, the place where you live. So I think family, we understand the significance of family, right? Family is very important to to our life. Business is our occupation we're involved in, also important. Our home, in other words, where we live, seemingly not so important, right? It's not that, we make many decisions in life. We chose here to live, we chose there to live. But from the fact that even that is announced on the speaker system, right? The heavenly voice announces where we're going to live. That shows that there's significance to the space that we're in. In other words, we have to elevate, we have to influence not just ourselves and our family, and not just the people that we come in contact with through work and through our business, but also the space that we're in. In other words, our relationship to the space is that you're here, God put you here for a reason. You think you decided, I want to go there and I want to go there. but really, God is orchestrating everything. And the fact that we end up in certain places is because there's a purpose for us to be there. We have to elevate it. We have to influence the space as well. The Baal Shem Tov was famous into really talking about this idea, this concept. And then he would say, just even like random, if you would just like end up somewhere, you never know why you're there. Perhaps you were there to elevate the place. And he would encourage people to say a blessing, do a mitzvah, because who knows if any good deed or a divine deed, a godly deed was ever done in this space. He would sometimes travel to the middle of the forest. He would stop, take out a glass of water, make a blessing, and drink it. And he would say, this place for so many years needed someone to make a blessing on it to elevate the space. Sometimes, if you're the Baal Shem Tov, you know where to go. But for us, God takes us there. God takes us there. So going back to Egypt, in last week's Parsha, when the Jewish people left Egypt, there was an interesting directive that the Jewish people had. And that was, before you leave, go to all your Egyptian neighbors and ask them for all of their valuables and empty out Egypt. Empty it out and then take it with you. Now, it's kind of like an odd type of request because, I mean, what? God needed them to have wealth. I mean, they're going to the desert. They have manna from heaven. I mean, what do they need it for? Like, there's no, like, for what? They wanted to make an investment. I want to have an investment, a savings account for my children's college. Like, what do they need it for? Like, they're going into Egypt. They're going to the desert. God's taking care of them. God needed them to take the valuables from the Egyptians. Like, what's the whole point of this, right? And one of the explanations that Chassidus gives is that there was more of a symbolism to the idea of elevating all the sparks, all the godly sparks that were able to be elevated from Egypt, to taking all these valuables. In other words, it was the Jewish people were there, and they had to. There were certain things that had to be elevated. So godly sparks had to be elevated from Egypt, and through borrowing all these valuables, they were able to. That was the significance of that was the symbolism of that was that they were elevating all the godly sparks that they were able to elevate, and they emptied it out, which means they left nothing that was still able to and needed to be elevated. Everything was done. In other words, the Jewish people completed their mission in Egypt, and because of that, there is no reason to go back. Because what do you need to go back for? You want to see the beautiful beaches in Egypt? You want to see the Nile River? For what? For what purpose? When we go somewhere, it's because there's this purpose. We have to influence that space. We may think that we're going because we have a great opportunity or it's a nice vacation, but ultimately, when you go somewhere, it's because you are meant to be there because there's a mission for your soul to that space to elevate it, to influence it. But in Egypt, we're done. There's no reason to go back. So that is why the Torah tells us the one place from all in the entire globe, throughout all history, we never had something similar. Egypt, we're done with. We have completed our mission. Egypt, no reason to be back in Egypt. Other places, we may have been there. We may have been in Spain, but you know what? Maybe there's still work for us in Spain. So we go back to Spain or other places like that, right? So this is what the Torah tells us. We have done our mission in Egypt. No reason to go back there. There's nothing to elevate. There's nothing to influence. It's done. From a Jewish perspective, at least. We don't have any business in Egypt anymore. But I think that the message is that the same is true with wherever we go, where we are allowed to go, it's because we still have work to do. So wherever we end up, we have to realize that God put us there for a reason to influence, to elevate this place. There was this great chassid of the first Chabad Rebbe, the Alter Rebbe. His name was Yosef, and he was from a place called Beishenkovitz. You pronounce that? We'll just call him Yosef, right? Keep it simple. He was a great chassid, someone who would study Torah all day, who would work on himself, refine his character. He wasn't so involved in the world around him. He was involved in lofty ideas in the world of synagogues and yeshiva. That was his life. He was married. And one day he visits his Rebbe, the Alter Rebbe. The Alter Rebbe tells him, for you, I don't want you to be a teacher, an influencer, a mashpia. What I want you to do is, I think it's important for you to become a wagon driver. Wagon driver. A wagon driver. I don't know the first two things about horses, about wagons, about business. I mean, this is like totally from left field, like a wagon driver. Alter Rebbe says, you should become a wagon driver. Become a wagon driver for a while. You'll know when you could stop being a wagon driver. Comes home to his wife and he's devastated. He says, our Rebbe told me I should become a wagon driver. What's me a wagon driver? His wife says, listen, the Rebbe said, you have to do it. And it wasn't easy for him. He delayed it and delayed it. Maybe he went back to the Rebbe and the Rebbe told it to him again. I don't remember all the details of the story, but basically got to a point where his wife says, Joseph, just try it out. Just do it. The Rebbe told you should do it. This is the right thing to do. So he goes to the stables where all the wagon drivers are, and he stops one guy. He says, "Oh, Rabbi Yosef, where are you going? Where are you headed? I'll be happy to take you. What an honor for me to take you to wherever you have to go." And he says, "No, I'm not going anywhere. I want to know if you could teach me the tricks of the trade. Teach me how to be a wagon driver." Yosef, what happened to you in your old age? Hey, I mean, yeah, I'm sorry. He's all embarrassed. I want to become a wagon driver. And he, until he realized he was serious, he wasn't joking. So he taught him, and it took him a while, but eventually he figured it out. He figured out how to become a wagon driver. And there he got himself a little horse, a little wagon, and put up signs all around town. New wagon driver, half price. Come, Rabbi Yosef of Bishenkovitz is our new wagon driver. Please join me on our trips. I'll take you wherever you need to go, whatever it is. And that's what he's doing. And he comes home in the evenings and he's embarrassed. He's telling his wife, "This is not for me. I don't know why I'm doing this. It's so difficult. I'm getting all dirty, and I don't know what." It's just. His wife says, "Don't worry, Rebbe. This is the Rebbe told you should do it. This is what you should do." One day, he was traveling, taking some passengers, and they stopped at an inn for the night. And Rabbi Yosef, even though he became a wagon driver, but he still remained the great Rabbi Yosef. And at night, he used to wake up in the middle of the night, and he used to pray. He used to daven. He used to cry. He used to do his lofty service at night. And while he's there in his room and he's crying and he's praying, someone wakes up and he notices this rabbi is praying. He gets very inspired. And he speaks to him. He says, "Wait, what are you doing?" He said, "Oh, yeah, I'm praying." He says, "You reminded me of my youth." Long story short, this was a Jewish person who left the way of Judaism. And he was so inspired by this man, this wagon driver's prayer, that eventually he says, "You know what? I'm re-embracing my Judaism." And he became a full-fledged observant Jew from this inspiration. And Rabbi Yosef realized that was the point, that was the purpose, and he went back to his Rebbe. The Rebbe said, "Okay, you fulfilled your mission. You can go back to becoming a teacher, teaching little children Torah." Because ultimately, what he realized is that he had a mission. He had to be at a certain inn, a certain setting, a certain time, in order to have this influence, that space, on people in that space. That was his purpose. That was his mission. So the Rebbe told him he should become a wagon driver. Each and every one of us, we have that mission. Come to a certain space, we have a connection to that space. We have to elevate it. We have to use it out. You can't. There was this a few years ago. There was this trip that some Jews made to all the way to the south. What's it called? Antarctica. The long trip. They went down to Argentina and this and that. There's a whole big deal. It's very expensive. And they ended up on Antarctica, and they while they were there, they concluded they studied some Talmud, and they concluded a tractate of Talmud. And the way they said it was, there's probably never a Jew studying Torah all the way down and who knows when the next time it will be. So now we're here, it must be for a reason. We're here not just to enjoy and take some pictures, but to infuse it with holiness, with godliness. Wherever we are, always keep that in mind. You never know why you're there. There's always a reason for it. That's my little thought for this week's Parsha. I'll leave you with that. Thank you for joining us. Have a Shavua Tov.
Thank you, Shavua Tov. Thank you. Bye-bye. See you guys.
Take care.